All right, Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Okay, so my schedule is a little all over the place here, so we're not going on our usual time. My apologies for that, but we will continue to do one episode a day, and you can catch it whenever it is that you have time. So today, what we're going to be talking about is one of the most consistent reproaches, demands that the Quraysh would make of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Mecca is asking him for a miracle. So their demand was that you claim to be a prophet, you say you have access to God, and you also tell us all these stories about prophets who brought all these amazing miracles. So where's your miracle? Where is, the earth, the desert turning into farmland, at the snap of your fingers or something, or there's like a river that bursts forth from this earth, or we see angels coming down, or we see a book that is, give us a book. I mean, you say that you're getting revelation. Where is it? We don't see it. We want to see it, and we should see it coming down, or we should be able to touch it, and then we'll think about how truthful you really are. And this is something that they kept at repeatedly. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was this demand was made of him continuously, and the Quran continued to refuse that this demand is not going to be fulfilled. It was fulfilled before for previous nations, didn't turn out very well. Actually, the consequences for those people themselves were pretty bad. They demanded, they got what they demanded, and they ended up getting the punishment of Allah because they even then would not believe. Their refusal to believe is not that there aren't enough reasons to believe, or that there's not enough evidence to believe. This refusal to believe is motivated by something else. This is coming from somewhere else. And that motivation is simply the status quo that they are so used to, the lifestyle, which is so indulgent, and the demand of Tawheed, which they see as all of that disappearing, their authority, their wealth, their pleasures, they see that just being taken away from them if they accept the prophethood of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of transgression. That's what's motivating these demands. To feed those motivations, to reinforce them, that is to respond to these demands and fulfill them. Allah refuses to do that. A. B, the stage that humanity is in, that infancy where those physical miracles were necessary, they were provided. Whatever the consequences were, there was an understanding, or there was some sense in that fulfillment. But humanity is not a cyclical process that one batch comes in and then repeat with the second batch, with the third batch, with the fourth batch. There is progressive development. There is evolution in human development, human societies. The ones that come in later, they are at a different phase of development. They're in a different place. And we see this, especially with the messages that the prophets bring. There is a difference in those messages in the sense that, of course, Tawheed remains the same, but the implications of that Tawheed. So, for example, with the people of Shu'aib alayhi salam, there are economic implications, which you do not see, especially in the prophets that were prior to Ibrahim alayhi salam. You don't see that with Nuh alayhi salam. You don't see that with Hud alayhi salam, with Salih alayhi salam. There are no implications of Tawheed that extend to the society. With Musa alayhi salam, there were political implications of Tawheed. With Shu'aib alayhi salam, as we said, there's economic. With Lut alayhi salam, there were social implications. So there's all these additional implications of Tawheed because the human society is evolving, it's growing, it's developing. And with that, where the human beings are intellectually and spiritually as well, that too is different. It is developing. And with that in mind, with that understanding, with that recognition, to provide those physical miracles would undermine, it would defeat the purpose of a last and final messenger. Because even prophethood is not going to last forever. There is a necessity that for human growth, prophethood is actually sealed. That prophethood comes to an end. It is a dependence that as long as it persists, there's only so much you can grow. And so one of the intents of the Quran is to close this door for good and empower human beings in other ways, especially with respect to acquiring knowledge, that revelation is completed and perfected, and no longer newer versions of revelation are no longer needed. So that whatever requirement that the society has of a revealed text, that is completed with the Quran. No revisions, no further revelations. And the nature of the Quran is such that it is capable of this dialogue with human acquisitions of knowledge in the future. And so more and more, the emphasis that the Quran places is not on those physical miracles of the past. They are alluded to, they are referred to, they are mentioned, of course. That was part of history, important phase of human development. But the ayat or the miracles that the Quran turns people's attention to are miracles in nature, commonplace. They're what you find in the mundane reality around you. Routine. Look at the leaves. Look at the sky. Look at the rain. Look at the vegetation. Those are the ayat. And so even the word miracle is not employed as such. The word that we are now maturing towards is to understand ourselves as well as people who comprehend ayat. We are sign interpreting and sign creating beings. And so the ayat of Allah, the Quranic ayat, and then ayat in nature. There is a very definitive reason why the Quran uses the same word to describe its own signs and the signs outside in the material world. So as to recognize this continuity, to recognize this purpose of the culmination of prophethood, it is to open these doors of exploration of these ayat in the material world and to recognize and know Allah better through these ayat. And so the demand as it came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam Allah responds to this, and this is ayah number 33 of Surah Al-An'am. قَدْ نَعْلَمُ إِنَّهُ لَيَحْزُنُكَ الَّذِي يَقُولُونَ. Allah says that we know that you're upset by what they say. We know that it hurts you. فَإِنَّهُمْ لَا يُكَذِّبُونَك. But you need to know that it's not you that they deny. They're not rejecting you. وَلَكِنَّ الظَّالِمِينَ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ يَجْحَدُونَ. In fact, it is the ayat of Allah that these unjust people are rejecting. Their rejection of you or their abuses hurled against you, they're rejecting Allah. It is the ayat of Allah that they have a problem with. Ayat, signs that threaten to increase their knowledge. But that's a threat they cannot take. Because signs that threaten to increase your knowledge threaten to change your beliefs. And they're not in a position to do that. They're not willing to accept that. And so they're rejecting. They don't want to shed their skins. They want to continue the way things are. They're afraid of what that would mean, to let go of all of these very fixed, very rigid beliefs that they hold about themselves in reality. They've twisted and turned them to their own ulterior advantages. Why would they respond to ayat? So it is the ayat of Allah that they are rejecting. And that's the dhulm that they're doing, because in accepting that, it was, yes, painful, of course, but ultimately fruitful for their own growth. And so that's the dhulm that they do, not just with the ayat of Allah, but with themselves. وَلَقَدْ كُذِّبَتْ رُسُلٌ مِّن قَبْلِكَ. And many messengers before you have already been denied, Ya Rasulullah. فَصَبَرُوا عَلَى مَا كُذِّبُوا وَأُوذُوا. But they endured all the denial and persecution. They were patient, perseverant. They had sabr. حَتَّى أَتَاهُمْ نَصْرُنَا. Until the point that our help came to them. Help of Allah does not immediately come. Not at the first stroke of persecution or difficulty. Sabr. They stood strong, they stood strong, they stood strong, they stood strong. To the point that they were barely able to stand. Then the help of Allah comes. وَلَا مُبَدِّلَ لِكَلِمَاتِ اللَّهِ. And there is no one who can change the words of Allah. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَكَ مِن نَبَإِ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. And you have already received some of the news of the previous messengers. So first response of Allah to this demand that persecutes Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is to console him. Console him by telling him they're rejecting us. They're not rejecting you. Second consolation, previous messengers, they had to bear through this as well. They stood strong. Now, what comes in after this is more stern. It is still a consolation, but it is far more stern. It is more on the nature of tough love. Because right around this time, the situation was so difficult and the demands were so persistent and so torturous upon Rasulullah ﷺ and the Sahaba that they had themselves started harboring, okay, why doesn't Allah give a miracle? I mean, it makes sense. How difficult is it for him? Why doesn't he just respond to their demand? And we do have narrations, and we have an entire surah that attests to this as well, with respect to the cleavage of the moon, that something to that effect did take place. Something to the effect of the demands that they're making, at least on one occasion, it was responded to. But the general response is no, not fulfilling your demands. So they did start wondering, why doesn't Allah just give what they're asking for? So Allah responds to them, وَإِن كَانَ كَبُرَ عَلَيْكَ إِعْرَاضُهُم. But if you find their aversion hard to bear, if it's too much for you, فَإِنِ اسْتَطَعْتَ أَن تَبْتَغِي نَفَقًا فِي الْأَرْضِ. So if you can, go dig yourself a tunnel in the ground. أَوْ سُلَّمًا فِي السَّمَاءِ. Or a ladder to ascend the sky. فَتَأْتِيهِمْ بِآيَةٍ. And bring them your sign. Whatever ayah they want, whatever sign they want, whatever miracle they want, you bring it to them. So here we see, and it's important within these conversations between Allah and Rasulullah to bring these conversations to light as well, that along with all the reassurances, along with all the consolations, the love, the affectionate love, there is this tough love as well. There are stern reminders as well. And they became necessary. And they are necessary in every loving relationship. This sternness. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in this place reminding Rasulullah very strictly. This is our decision and this is it. No conversation, no dialogue on this. Enough is enough. We know what this yields. So dig a tunnel in the earth, take a ladder to the sky, you bring them a sign. Of course, none of that is happening. Rasulullah cannot do that. That's what he's being reminded of. That is what he is communicating to the Quraysh. This is the response I got. Again, I'm not claiming to be God here. I'm claiming to be a messenger of God. He remains God. I just communicate even the scolding that I get, the reproaches that I get from Allah, I am duty bound to present that as such. Nothing held back. This is what he said. What do you want me to do now? وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَمَعَهُمْ عَلَى الْهُدَى. If Allah wanted, He could have just united them upon guidance. It's not difficult for Allah to guide somebody. But Allah does not oppress. Allah does not oppress. Forced guidance is oppression. It is taking away human freedom. If a mother wants, a mother can continue to carry her child for, 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old even. Strong mommies. They can do that. They can continue to hold on to their kids and not let go, but that is to the detriment of the child, him or herself. The child does not learn to walk. It is important to let go, to let them stumble, to let them even get hurt, so that they develop that strength. And so the ayat are there, and you have the faculties and the ability potentially to see these ayat for what they are, as depicting attributes of Allah. But if Allah continues to hold you, continues to send revelation after revelation after revelation, and that is something that those religions in the world today that believe in a living prophet, that is the argument that they make. Who've had prophets or have prophets in the previous century, even currently. That's the argument that and that's what it takes away from human growth, from human development. What sanctity it takes away from the material world, from human ability to understand and interpret this material world, and through this way, through this route, complement the understanding that comes from revelation, even improve their understanding of revelation, and get closer and closer to Allah. So Allah lets go, and yes, there's a lot of stumbling that happens, there's a lot of falling that happens, there's a lot of hurting that happens, still happening. But He would rather have that happen than oppress and take away human freedom. Because what that would do is it would render pretty much everything meaningless. And Allah refuses to make this universe, make human life batil. That's the one thing that He repeats again and again in the Quran. This has not been created batil, this is haqq. فَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. So Rasulullah is being reminded, and everybody else through him is being reminded, do not be of those who get overwhelmed by their emotions. Being jahil is a very important word. Typically we say that it's ignorance. That it is, of course, but a very particular form of ignorance. It is a form of ignorance that your emotions ride you. You are being ridden by your emotions. Your better understanding, your better reason cannot keep those emotions in check. Those emotions overwhelm you. The freedom that you're required to exercise in order to keep those emotions in check, those overwhelming emotions caused by hurt, caused by anger, caused by passion, caused by desire, all of these, they start riding you, they start driving you. That's somebody who is a jahil. What does knowledge do? Which is the opposite of ignorance. It helps you, it facilitates that reason, that intellect, the aql, so that it can keep those emotions in check. So that those who know are not the same as those who don't know. Because those who know have the power over themselves, more of a position to control themselves. So being of the jahilin would mean turning away from this knowledge, ignoring this knowledge, being arrogant in the face of this knowledge, and continuing to allow those passions, those desires, those unbridled emotions to drive you, to control you. Something that the Quraysh are doing when they're making these demands to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ignoring the ayat, the ilm that the Quran is believing or the Quran is bringing to them. إِنَّمَا يَسْتَجِيبُ الَّذِينَ يَسْمَعُونَ. Allah tells Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those who really hear, they will respond to you. وَالْمَوْتَى يَبْعَثُهُمُ اللَّهُ. As for those who are dead, this metaphor of life and death, the people who are willing to respond to the ayat, they're willing to grow. Those people who do not respond to the ayat, do not accept knowledge when it comes to them, they're arrogant in the face of knowledge. Their claim is, or their choice is, that whatever I already know is perfect. No room for improvement. No room for upgradation. That arrogance is death. And so Allah says that these dead people, Allah will raise them. Because as hard or as brittle, as inert as dead matter is, there's a physical shock of the highest degree is necessary to melt or to break through that inertness, that deadness, that hardness. وَالْمَوْتَ يَبْعَثُهُمُ اللَّهُ. So Allah will resurrect them, Allah will raise them. ثُمَّ إِلَيْهِ يُرْجَعُونَ. And then to Him they will be returned. وَقَالُوا لَوْلَا نُزِّلَ عَلَيْهِ آيَةٌ مِّن رَبِّهِ. And they say, why was a sign, why was a miracle? When they say ayah, they mean miracle. Not sent down to him from his Rabb. قُلْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَادِرٌ عَلَىٰ أَن يُنَزِّلَ آيَةً. Tell them Allah is fully capable of sending down any ayah. وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. But most of them do not know. They don't know what they're asking for. They don't know the consequences of it, the implications of it. وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ. And there is neither an animal on earth, وَلَا طَائِرٍ يَطِيرُ بِجَنَاحَيْهِ. Nor is there a flying creature flying with its two wings, إِلَّا أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُكُمْ. Except that they are communities like you. They're asking for miracle. Allah is saying, look at the creatures, animals on earth. Look at the birds flying in the sky. مَا فَرَّطْنَا فِي الْكِتَابِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. We have not neglected anything in the book. This is all from the book of Allah. This is all sacred knowledge out there. ثُمَّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِمْ يُحْشَرُونَ. Then all of them will be gathered to their Rabb. وَالَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا صُمٌّ وَبُكْمٌ. Those who deny our ayat, they're deaf and dumb. فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ. Lying in layers of darkness, refusing to learn, refusing to look at all of these miracles in the mundane, in the routine around them. مَن يَشَاءِ اللَّهُ يُضْلِلْهُ. Allah misleads whoever He wants. Or an alternative translation of this, whoever wants to be misled, Allah misleads them. وَمَن يَشَاء يَجْعَلْهُ عَلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. And whoever wants, Allah puts them on the straight path. If they make that choice, if they're willing for it, Allah accepts them. قُلْ أَرَأَيْتُكُمْ, say, Ya Rasulullah, have you seen in أَتَاكُمْ عَذَابُ اللَّهِ أَوْ أَتَتْكُمُ السَّاعَةُ, if the punishment of Allah comes to you or the final hour comes upon you, غَيْرَ اللَّهِ تَدْعُونَ, are you going to call upon anyone other than Allah? What happens to all those demands then when you're in desperate need? Isn't that a sign for you that reflexively, instinctively you turn to Allah? غَيْرَ اللَّهِ تَدْعُونَ, do you call on anyone other than Allah? إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ, honestly say, honestly respond if you really are truthful. Who do you turn to when you're desperate? بَلْ إِيَّاهُ تَدْعُونَ, in fact, only to Him you call upon. فَيَكْشِفُ مَا تَدْعُونَ إِلَيْهِ إِنْ شَاءَ. So Allah removes whatever you are calling Him for, whatever you're making dua to Him for, if He wants, وَتَنْسَوْنَ مَا تُشْرِكُونَ, and you'll forget whoever you associate with Him. وَآخِرُ دَعْوَانَا أَنِ الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Oops.